Poor girl took a beggar home, not knowing he's a millionaire CEO. What he did next shocked everyone. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. Now sit back and watch what happens when a woman follows her instincts and uncovers a truth the world was never supposed to see. Rain had a way of making Brooklyn look like it had secrets. The streets shimmered with oil-slick puddles, and the scent of yesterday's garbage mixed with wet concrete. It was the kind of morning where umbrellas flipped inside out and hope got soggy before noon. Lena Morales tightened her scarf against the wind and sprinted across Flatbush, dodging a cab that honked like it had a personal grudge. Her tote bag thumped against her hip. Her coffee was already cold, and the printout of her freelance pitch was damp at the edges because of course it was. 3 blocks to go. She glanced down to check her steps on the slick sidewalk, and that's when she saw it. A silver ring half submerged in a puddle near a storm drain. Thin and elegant but old. Engraved on the inside band were 3 small initials, DA, and a date, June 17th, 2020. Lena bent down instinctively, fingers brushing cold water as she scooped it up. The ring was surprisingly heavy. Real silver. Real worn. She almost pocketed it. Almost walked away. But then she glanced up and saw a figure huddled beneath the covered bench at the bus stop across the street. A man, barely awake. Clothes dark with rain. One hand cradled close to his side like it hurt. The other twitching slightly as if reaching for something lost. Lena crossed without thinking. Her boots splashed through the gutter. She approached carefully. "Hey," she called softly, crouching just outside the shelter. "You dropped this, I think." The man shifted, opened one eye, then the other. Up close, he didn't look like the usual unhoused figures Lena passed every day. His coat was threadbare but once expensive. A faded blue scarf was wrapped around his neck, not for fashion but precision, like a habit he couldn't shake. And his eyes, gray, tired, and alert, focused sharply on the ring in her palm. His voice, when it came, was gravel soft. "You shouldn't have seen that." It wasn't a threat, more like a memory surfacing. "I almost didn't," Lena said, kneeling now. "But I guess I'm too curious for my own good." He studied her, really studied her for a few seconds, too long. Then slowly reached out. His right hand was trembling. That's when she saw the blood. A long gash trailed across his palm, scabbed over badly as if he'd fallen hard and never cleaned it. "Jesus," Lena muttered. "You're hurt. I've had worse, I bet. But that doesn't mean you walk around bleeding like it's optional." She dropped her bag beside her and began rummaging. "Hold still." He blinked at her. "You're not seriously—" "Seriously," she said already, pulling out a mini first aid pouch. "Welcome to my anxiety kit. Bandages, alcohol wipes, and a pen I can click compulsively." He let her work in silence, only wincing once when the antiseptic touched raw skin. "What's your name?" she asked after a beat. He hesitated. Then Julian. "Julian," she repeated. "I'm Lena." She finished wrapping the bandage, tying it tight. "There! That won't last more than a few hours, but it's better than leaking out on the sidewalk." He gave the faintest smile. Lena reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the last granola bar she had half crumbled, slightly smushed. Breakfast. He took it like it was made of gold. They sat there for a few minutes, not quite together, not quite apart, just a man and a woman soaked in the city, sharing silence and a granola bar. Then Lena stood brushing rain off her jeans. "Take care of that hand, okay?" He didn't answer, just nodded, once eyes far away. 3 days passed. She told herself she wouldn't go that way again, that she didn't have time to worry about a stranger with haunted eyes and too much silence. But then came the storm. It was worse this time, wind like claws, rain like knives. Lena had just finished a night shift at the cafe and was cutting through the back alley to avoid a flooded crosswalk when she saw him again. Same coat. Same scarf. But this time he wasn't sitting up. He was slumped beside a rusted chain-link fence near the old train platform, soaked to the skin, lips pale. She dropped to her knees. "Julian." No answer. She touched his shoulder. Cold. Too cold. Panic surged. Hey, you're not dying, okay? Not on me. He stirred barely, eyes fluttered open. Recognition was slow, like memory filtered through fog. You came back? He rasped. You didn't exactly give me your address, she said, voice trembling. She looked around, no one else in sight. No security, no good Samaritan in a passing car. Just her. She didn't think. She just acted. Okay, she muttered, looping one of his arms over her shoulder. I'm not strong, but I'm stubborn, and you're not sleeping out here another night. It took forever to get him the 5 blocks to her building up the narrow stairs through the creaky door of her tiny apartment. She half-dragged, half-guided him to the worn couch. When he collapsed into it, eyes barely open, she took his coat off, peeled his scarf away, and saw the full damage bruises, fever, sweat, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. She pulled her one good blanket over him and stood there, dripping, heart-pounding. Julian, if that was even his real name, was asleep. Or unconscious. She didn't know what she'd just invited into her life. But she knew one thing. People don't just whisper about boardrooms in their sleep unless they've lived in them. And no one carried a ring that beautiful unless they had something to lose. She turned toward the kitchen, made tea, sat at the table watching the storm slam against her windows. Tomorrow she'd ask him the truth. Tonight she'd let him rest. And somewhere deep inside, something old and stubborn, her belief in stories that matter began to flicker back to life. The storm hadn't let up by the time Lena made tea, cheap jasmine from a dollar store box, but it filled the apartment with warmth that fought against the damp chill. The windows hissed with every gust of wind. Pipes in the wall clanged like distant footsteps. Her place was old, drafty, and far too small for 2 people, but for some reason, it didn't feel crowded. She sat across from the couch with her cup cradled in both hands, watching Julian breathe. The man looked like he belonged to a different world before it had swallowed him whole. Underneath the layers of soaked fabric and fatigue, his features were striking. Not in a magazine cover way, but in a quiet, weary kind of grace. High cheekbones, a jawline shadowed with stubble and lashes too long for someone who'd clearly stopped caring about vanity. But it wasn't his appearance that held her attention. It was the sense that everything about him was held tightly under lock and key. Even in unconsciousness, his hand curled protectively near his chest. Lena's eyes drifted to the ring on the table between them. She'd placed it there beside a folded towel. The initials D.A. were still visible beneath the moisture. Daniel Archer. That name hadn't crossed her mind yet. Not consciously. But the initials scratched at something. A press conference she half-watched months ago. An obituary that didn't add up. A vanished CEO. A woman who cried on camera. And a company that quietly shifted hands with no real explanation. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought. There were plenty of people with those initials. Plenty of stories that never made the front page. And yet... She stood and pulled a spare blanket from her closet, then crouched to gently drape it over him. As she tucked the edges around his shoulder, his lips moved. At first, she thought he was waking. But his eyes stayed closed. His voice, barely audible, was broken and half-mumbled. The board, not without Serena. Tell Vale to delay the vote. Lena froze. Serena. She leaned in a little closer, holding her breath. Shell 3. Cayman. Dissolve the trust. The words were disjointed fragments of something corporate, no something secret. Not the ravings of a madman, but the cracked edge of a boardroom whisper caught between dream and confession. She slowly sat back on her heels, heart ticking louder in her chest. Julian, or whoever he was, wasn't just a man sleeping on a bench. He wasn't just someone who lost everything. He was someone who'd once had everything, and maybe someone who'd seen too much. Her fingers curled around the chipped ceramic of her mug, grounding herself. She'd been a journalism student once, a good one, before the rejections piled up, before the burnout, before she started telling herself stories weren't worth chasing anymore. But this felt like a beginning. She rose and padded quietly to her desk, careful not to wake him. Pulled out her recorder out of habit more than anything and set it beside the ring. Her eyes drifted back to the man on her couch. "You're not going to disappear on me," she whispered to herself. "Not until I know who you are." Then she turned off the kitchen light, sat back down with her tea, and waited for the storm and her questions to settle. Julian didn't wake until the light had shifted from gray to gold, the kind of filtered Brooklyn sunlight that only slipped through Lena's fire escape after 10. By then the tea had gone cold, the rain had stopped, and Lena had checked his breathing more times than she cared to admit. She was sitting at her desk with her laptop open and her cracked phone charging beside her when he stirred. No gasps, no groggy muttering. Just a long, slow exhale, as if he were exhaling a decade, and then the sound of fabric shifting against her couch. She turned. He was awake. His eyes scanned the unfamiliar ceiling, the bookshelf cluttered with dog-eared paperbacks, the wall calendar still stuck on last month, and finally her, watching him. His hand moved first, instinctively reaching for his side where the bandage still clung. "I'm still here," he said hoarsely. "Did you think I'd toss you in the trash while you slept?" He offered a weak smile. "Wouldn't have blamed you." "You were barely conscious in the rain," Lena said, standing. "I'm not a saint, just not willing to let someone freeze to death outside my building." His eyes scanned the room again. "It's small. Rent-controlled miracle," she replied. "And don't get excited. My hospitality doesn't extend to waffles and fresh towels. I'll take survival." She watched him sit up slowly, every movement tight and deliberate, like he was testing his limbs for breakage. The blanket slid off his shoulders. He didn't seem like the kind of man used to being cared for, and he definitely didn't seem used to waking up somewhere safe. "I didn't mean to impose," he said. "You didn't." "Not really." She walked to the kitchen. "I made coffee. It's terrible, but it's hot." When she handed him the mug, their fingers brushed. He flinched just slightly, not from fear but from habit. They sat in near silence as he sipped, eyes closing as if the bitterness revived something in him. After a beat, Lena spoke. "So, Julian, is that still your name today?" His jaw tensed, and he didn't answer right away. "That ring," she continued, "the one I found, it's back on my table. I cleaned it, by the way. Hope you don't mind." He glanced toward it, then looked away. "I'm not trying to dig," Lena said, "but I'm also not stupid. People don't whisper about trust dissolutions and board votes in their sleep unless they used to wear suits worth more than my rent." A slow exhale. "Then Julian is fine. For now. I work freelance," she added. "Sometimes PR, sometimes ghostwriting, sometimes odd jobs. But I studied journalism, so I ask questions, especially when someone shows up bleeding on a sidewalk with a ring engraved like a ghost story." He took another sip of coffee. "And do you always invite those ghosts into your apartment?" "Only the polite ones." He cracked a reluctant smile at that. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "Do I need to worry about someone showing up at my door?" Silence. "No," he said finally. "Not unless they're looking for someone who doesn't exist anymore." That answer, vague, cryptic, but firm, told her more than he probably intended. He wasn't just running from poverty or bad luck. He was running from a version of himself. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked. "I've been around," he said. "New York, San Francisco, Geneva, then nowhere. Now, here." Lena's brows lifted. Geneva people didn't casually drop that unless they'd once flown business class and understood how offshore accounts worked. But instead of pressing further, she stood. "I've got a shift in 20 minutes. I'll leave you some soup and crackers if you promise not to rob the place." He looked surprised. "You're leaving me here?" "Don't flatter yourself," she replied. "I took photos of everything I own, and you're not strong enough to carry my microwave." His smile flickered again, wry and sad. She paused at the door, keys in hand. "One rule. Don't disappear. If you leave, I want to know why." He looked down at the mug, then up at her. "I won't," he said. "Not yet." She nodded once, then slipped out into the morning light. The rest of Lena's day passed in a blur. Coffee shop to courier gig to answering 2 emails she didn't want to send. But her thoughts kept circling back. He'd fixed her faucet. He folded the towels. He had the quiet hands of someone who used to command rooms but now measured each movement like it cost something. She didn't know who he was, but her gut told her this wasn't just charity. Someone was going to come looking for him. And if she was right, she had just stepped into a story much bigger than a ring in a puddle. The moment Lena stepped outside, the wind hit her like a slap. Cold, insistent smelling of rain-soaked brick and car exhaust. She tightened her coat and ducked her chin into her scarf, but her mind wasn't on the weather. It was still back in her apartment, with the man who called himself Julian. She couldn't stop replaying the way he'd looked at the ring when she mentioned it, like it hurt to see it again. Not like a lost trinket, but like a wound reopened. On the subway ride to her coffee shift, her brain spun with possibilities. Maybe he was a disgraced executive. Maybe he'd faked his death. Maybe she was being naive. Maybe she was making a huge mistake. But it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like the edge of something dangerous. Yes, but also important. She reached for her phone, pulled up the voice recorder app, and tapped a new file. Journal entry, October 19th. Subject Julian, alias probably. Male approx, mid-30s, observant, soft-spoken. Familiar with corporate terminology, specifically trusts board votes, mergers. Also seems capable with basic repairs and organizational tasks. Sleep-talking about something big, dangerous, possible link to Echelon Systems scandal. Worth researching. Serena Vale. She paused the recording, then sighed and whispered to herself, "I sound insane." The train rocked and slowed. She pocketed her phone and disembarked, weaving through crowds. But her thoughts didn't let go. Back in her apartment, Julian sat upright on the couch, staring at a faded postcard pinned to the wall above her desk. It was of a bookstore in Paris, one she'd never visited, just found in a second-hand shop. Scrawled on the back in her own handwriting were the words, "Someday, when things make sense." He stood slowly, muscles tight from days sleeping rough. His body still ached, especially the ribs, but it was the silence of the apartment that unnerved him more than any pain. It had been years since he'd been in someone else's space without needing to lie or manipulate. He stepped into the kitchen, careful not to disturb anything. The fridge was humming. The stove was old, but clean. On the counter sat a notebook, splayed open, its pages filled with scribbles and timelines. One name leapt out at him, Serena Vale. He closed the notebook gently, like it might explode. She was already digging. He looked at the coffee mug she'd given him. It had a cartoon owl on it and read "Night Owl Fuel." He smiled despite himself. A journalist. Of course, he could have left. She hadn't locked the door. But something held him there. Maybe it was the quiet bravery in her eyes. Maybe it was the way she hadn't demanded anything, even when she knew he wasn't telling her the full truth. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the truth itself. Something he hadn't said out loud in 2 years. That what had happened to him wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. And Lena Morales was the first person who might be willing to help him steal it back. Lena got home late. The cafe had been slammed, understaffed, overcaffeinated, and her feet ached in places that shouldn't exist. She'd missed dinner. Her phone was at 12% and she hadn't stopped thinking about the man on her couch all day. She climbed the narrow stairs 2 at a time, instinct prickling. The hallway was quiet. Too quiet. She unlocked the door, nudged it open, and froze. Julian was seated at her desk, not asleep, not hiding, reading. Her notebook, her notes was open in front of him, her voice recorder playing faintly. The light above him cast soft shadows across his face, giving him the look of a man somewhere between fugitive and confessor. "You went through my things," she asked, heart racing. He didn't look up. "You left them out." "That doesn't mean I was careful," he said, finally lifting his eyes. "I didn't touch anything else." Lena stepped inside and shut the door behind her. "You're lucky I didn't bring pepper spray." He gave her a tired half smile. "I thought you were the kind of person who carried that already." "I carry bandages and truth serum," she muttered, tossing her keys into the bowl. "The rest is optional." She dropped her bag by the coat rack and walked over slowly. Her notebook was flipped to a page labeled Julian, Assumptions versus Proof. Her stomach tightened. "Why didn't you tell me your name was Daniel Archer?" she asked quietly. The pause that followed felt like it bent time. Outside, the wind gusted against the fire escape, but the room held its breath. "I didn't know if I could trust you," he said. "And now I still don't know," he admitted. "But I'm tired of lying." She sat on the edge of the couch, arms crossed. "So, are you really him?" He nodded once. "Yes. The Daniel Archer, founder of Echelon Systems, went missing 2 years ago in a helicopter crash." "Yes." Lena exhaled. Part of her had been waiting for denial, some convoluted twist or gaslighting smirk. But no, he said it plainly, like it wasn't just true, but heavy. "They held a memorial for you," she said. "Your ex-fiancée, Serena Vale, cried in front of cameras for weeks." Daniel looked away. "She's very good at public grief. And the company gone, or what's left of it, has been cut up and sold through holding accounts. I've been watching it unravel from the outside. And you're just letting it happen." His jaw clenched. "I let it happen once. That was the mistake. I trusted her, trusted too many people. And now they've hollowed out everything I built." Lena's voice sharpened. "So what are you doing? Hiding, waiting to die. Why come back now?" "I wasn't going to come back," he said. "Not ever." But then his voice faltered. "Then you found the ring." She blinked. "The ring. It wasn't just mine," he said. "It belonged to my father. I carried it because I couldn't let go of who I used to be. But when you showed up and handed it back, I realized I hadn't buried that part of me." "Not really." He looked at her, raw and vulnerable. "You reminded me what it felt like to matter." The silence between them shifted, no longer heavy, but taut with something unsaid. Lena softened. Just a little. "I've been applying for jobs nonstop," she said. "Nobody wants a freelance journalist with a resume full of dead ends. But this is something real. You're something real. I'm something dangerous," he said. She leaned forward. "So is the truth." Before he could reply, a sharp knock echoed through the apartment. They both froze. Lena stood slowly, heart thudding. Another knock, this time followed by a voice. "Miss Morales, Nathan Reed. Sorry to bother you so late. Just a few questions." Julian went pale. Lena looked at him. Then the door, then back. She walked over quietly, looked through the peephole. Well-dressed. Trim beard, leather gloves, no badge, just confidence. Nathan knocked again, more firmly. "I believe you might have encountered someone we've been looking for. Man in his 30s, scar on his right hand." Lena's stomach turned. Julian didn't move, just whispered, "Don't let him in." Lena swallowed hard, turned the lock and opened the door a crack. "Sorry," she said brightly. "Long day." "What's this about?" Nathan smiled. "Just following up on a few missing persons reports. There's a man goes by Julian, or sometimes Daniel. Bit unstable. Possibly dangerous." Her voice was steady, but her fingers gripped the door tight. "No one like that here." "Mind if I come in?" "I do, actually," she said. "Unless you've got a warrant or an invitation, I'd suggest you move on." The smile didn't falter, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "You'd let a dangerous man in Miss Morales. You sure you're safe in there?" Her voice dropped. "I think I'll take my chances with the truth." She closed the door, locked it, deadbolt and chain. When she turned, Julian was already packing the ring and the voice recorder into his coat pocket. "I'll leave," he said. "No," she said quickly. "You won't." He blinked. "You said you were done hiding," she said. "So prove it." Daniel Archer looked at her for a long, silent beat. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Outside, Nathan's footsteps receded down the hall. Inside, Lena Morales began to sketch the outline of a story no one had dared to tell. Not yet. The door clicked shut, and the echo of Nathan's final knock still hummed through the silence like the aftershock of a gunshot. Lena leaned her forehead against the wood, letting herself breathe again. Her hand trembled slightly, as she turned the deadbolt twice more just for good measure. When she finally stepped away, her legs felt heavier than they should have. Daniel was by the window, backlit by the gray wash of streetlights, one hand braced on the sill as he stared down toward the street below. "Did he see me?" he asked without turning. "I don't think so," she replied. "But he's not going to stop." Daniel didn't answer. His shoulders were tense, the outline of his body tight with something that looked like shame and old reflexes. She recognized it, the posture of someone used to being hunted by headlines' betrayal or worse. Lena stepped into the room and stood a few feet behind him. Is he working for Serena? Yes. Her fixer. Her shadow. When she wants something erased quietly, she sends Nathan. "You didn't tell me someone was actively looking for you," she said. "I wasn't supposed to be alive," he replied. "I made sure of that. Until now." His voice was flat, but she could hear the crack underneath. "Then, why come back into the world?" she asked. He turned to face her rain-gray eyes meeting hers with something exposed. "Because I saw what she's doing. Serena. She's not just draining Echelon for profit. She's prepping it for a merger with a foreign tech conglomerate. They're using it to backdoor sensitive data systems. It's not just my company anymore, it's a weapon." Lena blinked. "How do you know I've been following the shell companies, the IP transfers? I kept backups, encrypted files, but I didn't have a way to release any of it without outing myself. Not until you." That made her breath catch. "You found me," he said, "and you didn't run, you didn't exploit it. You gave me soup and let me sleep. Don't forget the granola bar," she whispered. He gave a faint smile. Then the weight returned. "If you're going to help me, Nathan won't stop. Serena won't either. They'll discredit you, dig up your life. Make sure no one listens to a washed-out freelancer in Brooklyn." Lena's laugh was bitter. "Joke's on them. I've already been ignored by everyone that matters." She walked past him, grabbed her notebook from the desk, and flipped to a clean page. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Writing," she said. "If I'm going to risk my career, my apartment, and my sanity for you, we're going to do it right." She looked up. "You're going to tell me everything, and we're going to tell the world." Daniel stared at her for a long, still moment. Then something in his expression shifted barely. The flicker of a man who had once stood in boardrooms and believed in things. "All right," he said softly. "Let's begin." Lena hadn't pulled an all-nighter since college, but her body remembered how. By sunrise, her fingers were sore from typing, her coffee pot was empty, and a corkboard she hadn't touched in months was now pinned with sticky notes, receipts, printed headlines, and hand-scrawled timelines. Daniel stood near the window, arms crossed his profile, limned in the thin amber light creeping in through the blinds. His expression hadn't changed much in hours, watchful, quiet, haunted. But beneath that stillness, Lena could feel it, the spark of movement, of purpose. So she said, finally pushing back from the desk, "Let's make sure I have this straight." She grabbed a marker and underlined the center of the corkboard, "Echelon Systems Death by Theft." "You founded Echelon 6 years ago," she began, pacing in socks across her hardwood floor. "A data privacy startup focused on building encrypted frameworks that couldn't be manipulated by governments or corporations." Daniel nodded once. "You brought in Serena Vale, your fiancée at the time, as CFO. Publicly, she supported your vision. Privately, she started rerouting internal resources through fake consulting firms. She convinced the board I was becoming erratic," Daniel said. "Too idealistic, too slow to monetize." Then came the helicopter crash. "Engine failure," Lena murmured. "Except it wasn't. The flight was real, but the crash was staged. You bailed out early, emergency jump near Hudson Bay. I had a deal with the pilot. He got paid. I got dead." Lena shot him a dry look. "You faked your own death because you thought you'd lost control of the company. I faked my death because the moment I challenged Serena's vote, I became disposable. If I'd stayed visible, she'd have done worse than discredit me." Lena studied him for a beat longer, then nodded toward the corkboard. "And the files you gave me, these backups? They're time-stamped. Internal emails, wire transfers. I used a private cloud and encrypted everything with a double-key system, which means we can't release any of it unless both of us agree," she said. I didn't plan it that way on purpose, he replied. But I don't trust many people. Not anymore. She sat down slowly. Well, you're in luck. I'm nosy, underemployed, and a sucker for poetic justice. A small, reluctant smile tugged at his mouth. Now, Lena said, cracking her knuckles. Let's talk about this tech conference. Daniel crossed the room, unrolling a folded brochure from his coat pocket. Serena is scheduled to keynote the Data and Trust Forum next Friday. She's unveiling a new Echelon-adjacent platform under a new name, of course. But it's built on my architecture. She's rebranding your legacy, Lena muttered, and selling it as hers. To a foreign data conglomerate, he added. Which means once they acquire it, all of Echelon's privacy guarantees go out the window. Lena leaned in. Then we expose it. We hijack the conference leak. The evidence trigger a formal investigation. Daniel looked skeptical. You think a couple of voice memos and spreadsheets are enough? No, she said. But if we time it right, and if I use my contact at Voxlight PR, we might get a press badge into the conference. He blinked. You still know people in media used to intern under a woman who now runs strategy for their tech section. I ghostwrote her wedding blog once. She owes me. She grabbed her laptop. I'll reach out today. Pretend I'm pitching a profile on Serena. If I can get inside, I'll drop the files on a public server, send out pre-written exposé pieces to embargoed media, and record the fallout live. Daniel looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. What she asked. You were never just a journalist, he said. You were a disruptor. Lena's cheeks flushed slightly, but she didn't look away. Then let's cause some disruption. That night they sat on opposite sides of her tiny living room, laptops, open notes scattered across the coffee table. Lena drafted questions, search terms, a burner email. Daniel cross-referenced metadata, recovered flagged code samples, rebuilt access logs from memory. At one point they both reached for the same coffee mug. Their hands brushed. Neither moved away immediately. Why me? She asked, voice low. Daniel glanced at her expression, unreadable. Because when I was invisible, you saw me anyway. Lena looked down at the mug, then back up. I'm going to help you get your truth out, she said. But after that, what are you going to do? Daniel was quiet for a long time. Then I don't know. I'm not sure there's a place for who I used to be. Then we'll figure out who you are now, Lena said. The rain had stopped, but thunder rolled far off in the distance. It wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time it felt like the beginning. By midnight, Lena's apartment looked like it belonged to someone unraveling a conspiracy. The corkboard on the wall had doubled in size, now covered in printer paper, yellow post-its, and color-coded arrows held up by old tape and pushpins. She'd even strung red thread between events, half ironically, half because it made things clearer. Daniel stood back, arms crossed, scanning the board like a soldier revisiting a battlefield. You know, she said from the floor where she sat surrounded by printed PDFs, I always thought if I ever cracked a real story, it would involve small-town corruption. Shady developers. Maybe a stolen city council election. Not a faked death and a hostile tech takeover. Definitely not a man sleeping under a bus bench with boardroom trauma, she said, smiling. He tilted his head, watching her. And yet you didn't walk away. Lena shrugged. Didn't want to spend my life writing listicles about 10 ways to style your pantry. There was a pause. She looked up. His expression had softened. What she asked. Daniel's voice dropped. I forgot what it's like to be around someone who believes in something. Without strategy, without calculation. She tried to laugh, but it caught in her throat. I fake it better than I thought. He crouched beside her, picking up one of the diagrams she'd sketched. It showed the flow of ownership between Echelon, its shell companies, and a vague parent conglomerate marked ThroughSight Global. You did all this in one night, he asked. She smirked. Journalism degree, obsessive tendencies, and a deep-seated grudge against corporate fraud. He handed her a highlighter and sat cross-legged opposite her. I didn't build Echelon to be profitable, he said. I built it because I thought we could make privacy the default, not a luxury. Lena looked at him, really looked. Then why bring in someone like Serena Vale? His face darkened. because I loved her, and because I was stupid enough to think love was loyalty. Silence spread between them for a moment, gentle but sharp. Lena didn't press. She knew better than most that betrayal left echoes. Sometimes in your bed, sometimes in your inbox, sometimes in your gut at 2 a.m. when your whole life felt like static. She reached over and grabbed a blanket from the couch, tossing it at him. "You're sleeping on the floor tonight. If you get couch privileges again, you have to earn them." His smile was faint but real. "Understood. Also, if you steal my coffee in the morning, I will consider it an act of war. No caffeine theft. Noted." She began collecting the loose papers into stacks, her movement slower now, the adrenaline fading. As Daniel lay back on the floor, hands folded behind his head, he stared up at the ceiling. "Lena, yeah, if this works, if Serena gets exposed, she'll come after you too." Lena paused, then looked over her shoulder. "She'll try." Daniel watched her in the dim light as she turned back to her laptop, typing again with quiet fury and purpose. And for the first time since the crash, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt like a man standing next to a storm and maybe ready to walk through it. The lobby of Voxlight PR buzzed with the rhythm of high-stakes image management. Glass walls, blazers, and Bluetooth headsets, the kind of place that smelled like eucalyptus and ambition. Lena adjusted her scarf and stepped up to the receptionist, brandishing the one thing more powerful than charm, a favor someone owed her. "I'm here to see Rachel Deems," she said calmly. "I sent her the proposal this morning, tech keynote profile on Serena Vale." The receptionist checked the screen. "She's in a meeting. She'll want to take this one." 5 minutes later, Lena sat across from Rachel's desk, pitching like her life depended on it, which in some ways it did. The conference was less than a week away. The press passes would close by tomorrow. She needed in. "She's reinventing Echelon in her own image," Lena said, her voice steady. "I've got a fresh angle, Serena, as the modern tech oracle. No tired gender cliches. Just sharp visual storytelling." Rachel narrowed her eyes. "You disappeared, Morales. You could have had a column by now." Lena gave a wry smile. "I took a detour. But this story, it's the one I've been waiting for." Rachel exhaled, then slid a card across the desk. "One shot. Don't make me regret it." Lena left with the badge in her hand and adrenaline in her veins. Back at the apartment, Daniel stood over the stove, poking at scrambled eggs like they were a math problem. "You cook?" Lena asked, dropping her bag by the door. "I survive," he muttered. "You're the one with 5 kinds of hot sauce and no pepper." She grinned. "Pepper is predictable." He handed her a plate and they sat cross-legged on the floor as usual. The coffee table had long since vanished beneath file folders and burner phones. She tapped the badge on her lanyard. "I'm in. Friday morning. Serena's keynote starts at 11. I'll go in early, blend in with the media act like I'm just here for a fluff piece." Daniel nodded, his eyes scanning the notes. "The USB is ready. Encrypted failsafe. One plug-in and the auto launch drops everything: emails, voice memos, proof of offshore accounts. And we'll blast it out to prepped media contacts seconds after it goes live," Lena added. They'd spent the last 2 nights writing the exposé together. Daniel's voice had trembled slightly during playback of one recording, Serena's voice, cold and unmistakable, saying, "The board won't care about his ideals once the money clears." He hadn't said anything afterward, just sat in silence, staring at the floor. Now Lena reached across the chaos of the table and touched his hand. "We're not doing this for revenge. We're doing this for the people who trusted you, the people who thought Echelon was more than just another sellout." Daniel nodded, jaw tight. "Let's make sure it means something." The next day brought the first sign of trouble. A plain envelope slipped under the door. No return address. Inside, a photo of Lena walking to her apartment. And a note. "Curiosity kills careers." Daniel found her holding it by the window, her face pale but composed. "I told you she'd come after you," he said quietly. Lena set the photo down. "I'm not afraid of paper threats." "You should be." She turned. "I'm not doing this because I feel brave, Daniel. I'm doing it because I'm done watching people like Serena rewrite history." His eyes searched hers, And for the first time, she saw real fear there, not for himself, but for her. "I've already lost too much," he said. "I'm not yours to lose," she replied softer than she meant to. He blinked, then nodded. And with that, the line between them, drawn with caution, shadows, and secrets, blurred a little more. That night, Lena wrote a final fail-safe draft of the exposé and scheduled it in her secure folder set to release if she didn't cancel it by 3 p.m. Friday, just in case. Daniel stood at the window again, watching the lights of Brooklyn flicker in the drizzle. "I never thought my legacy would come down to a file and a woman with a scarf and a chipped mug," he said. Lena glanced up from her laptop. Better than it ending in silence and a staged obituary. He turned, smiled faintly. "You ever think we were meant to meet?" She hesitated. "No." He raised an eyebrow. "I think we were meant to matter, and that's not the same thing." He didn't answer, but the quiet between them felt like agreement, and in that quiet they waited for Friday for Serena for truth to step into the spotlight. By Thursday night, the apartment no longer felt like home, it felt like a war room. The corkboard now curved around the corner of the room like a conspiracy mural. Strings ran between evidence pins like veins. Daniel's old files, some decrypted, some still locked, glowed on Lena's laptop screen. She barely registered the rain tapping at the fire escape or the distant sound of a train rumbling underground. Everything narrowed to a single idea. They had one shot, and it had to count. Daniel stood over her shoulder as she reviewed the trigger sequence again. "This file deploys on insert," she asked, pointing to the USB's contents. He nodded. "Auto executes within 6 seconds. Runs the presentation file, the audio drops, and the data pack opens like a floodgate. Everything Serena buried will surface live." Lena exhaled. "You double-checked the timing 3 times. She bit her lip, scanning the file path one more time, her fingers trembling only slightly. "I don't know if I'm terrified or electrified," both Daniel said. "That's how you know it matters." She leaned back, rubbing her temples. "I keep thinking about what happens after. What if she spins it? What if the press gets cold feet? She'll try to discredit us," Daniel said. "Frame it as revenge porn from a bitter ex. Maybe even forge a countersuit for defamation, and they'll eat it up." "Some will," he said, "but truth leaves residue, and once it's out, she can't control it." Lena let that settle in. He was right. They weren't just launching a story, they were igniting a fuse, and once the spark hit the line, it wouldn't stop. Still, she muttered, "I wish we had something more cinematic, a moment that would make them listen before they could lie." Daniel hesitated. Then quietly he walked to his coat and pulled something from the inside pocket. A ring. Silver. The same one she'd found in the gutter weeks ago. But this time he placed it on the table with quiet deliberation. "My father wore this at every board vote of his life. When Serena and I launched Echelon, I had it in my pocket the day we signed the incorporation papers." Lena looked at him. He met her eyes. "Bring it with you tomorrow. When the moment's right, show it. People will recognize it. The board knows it. The investors. It'll say what I don't have time to explain." Her fingers closed gently around it. Heavy. Cool. Personal. "Are you sure?" He smiled barely. "That ring built a company. Maybe now it can unmask what it became." A hush settled between them. Not silence exactly, just the stillness of knowing everything had been set in motion. Lena stood and packed the ring and USB into a padded pocket inside her shoulder bag. Double zippered, triple checked. Daniel walked her to the door as if she were already leaving. "You'll be okay?" she asked, glancing around the apartment. "I've lived in worse hideouts," he said. "And I've got backup plans." "Paranoid, much prepared," he said. "There's a difference." At the door they paused. Neither reached for the other, but something passed between them, acknowledgement maybe, or something like hope. "If something goes wrong," he started. She cut him off. "It won't." And before he could say anything more, she stepped into the hallway. The door clicked behind her. Tomorrow was the end of something. Or the beginning. The Data and Trust Forum looked like a cathedral built for power. Glass walls 2 stories high. White marble floors that clicked beneath every pair of designer heels. Giant LED screens pulsed with futuristic blues and silvers, rotating images of sleek devices, smiling faces, and buzzwords like integrity, transparency, innovation. Lena adjusted her press badge and kept moving. She'd dressed the part-tailored black blazer, low-heeled boots, and her shoulder bag, slung cross-body like armor. The USB was tucked safely into a foam-padded sleeve beside her notebook. The silver ring sat in a tiny velvet pouch by her heart. As she passed a security checkpoint, no one even blinked. Serena Vale was scheduled to speak at 11:00 a.m. It was 10:26. Backstage. Serena stood before a mirror adjusting a small diamond earring. She wore navy, understated but severe. A stylist dabbed translucent powder on her cheekbone. Behind her, two assistants stood by with tablets noting PR cue cards, camera angles, timing cues. "Nathan," she said. Her fixer stepped in from the hallway. "She's here. Lena Morales. And alone. No sign of him." Serena stared at her reflection, then smiled faintly. Then she brought him another way. She stood, smoothed her blazer. "Let's give them a show." Lena took her seat near the back of the press row. Her heart tapped a staccato beat inside her chest, echoing in her ears. In her hand, she held the USB drive. She glanced at the security camera above the stage, another near the exit. Nothing she couldn't work around if the timing held. At 11:02, Serena Vale walked on stage to polite applause. Her voice was calm, her posture impeccable. "2 years ago, we lost a pioneer," she began. "Daniel Archer. A man whose vision built the foundation of secure digital spaces, but who tragically could not adapt to the demands of a changing world." Lena's jaw tightened. Serena smiled softly. "Today, I bring you the future he dreamed of, rebuilt, refined, and ready to change the world." She turned and gestured toward the screen. A logo unfurled, Courion. Beneath it, the tagline, "Privacy Perfected." That was the cue. Lena stood, walked slowly down the aisle. Every step was calculated, steady, deliberate. She reached the media panel, plugged the USB into the open port beneath the side projector. 1 second. 2. A loading bar blinked on screen. Then everything changed. The Courion logo glitched. The display froze. A familiar voice crackled through the speakers. Daniel's voice. "You tried to bury me, Serena. But the truth doesn't stay quiet." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. Journalists leaned forward, fingers flying over keyboards. Board vote audio. April 14th, 2021. Daniel's voice continued. "Serena, the architecture's done. Once he's out of the picture, we'll rename it, sell it off, and no one will question it." Then emails, bank records, schematics, all displayed on the giant screen, proof of a trail of betrayal. And finally a video feed. Daniel Archer, standing in the middle of the conference floor, very much alive. The room fell to stunned silence. Lena turned toward him just as Serena spotted him from the stage. Her smile collapsed. "No," she whispered. "You're alive," Daniel said. His voice calm, clear, measured. "Very." Security hesitated, unsure of what to do. The audience was riveted. Daniel raised his hand and held up the silver ring. "I built this company," he said, "and I watched it die at the hands of someone I trusted. Someone who thought ethics were obstacles and silence could be bought." He turned toward the crowd, his voice carrying through the room. "But this isn't about me. It's about truth. And today, you saw it for yourselves." He stepped back. "I'm not reclaiming anything. I'm just making sure it's not stolen again." Then he turned and walked toward the exit. No fanfare, no applause, just a man who refused to be erased. Lena followed him out. Behind them, voices erupted. Questions, shouts, flashbulbs. They didn't stop. Not until they reached the alley behind the conference center, out of view. There, for the first time all day, Daniel let out a breath that sounded like it had been waiting 2 years to escape. "You okay?" she asked. He shook his head. "But I will be. You did it." He looked at her, really looked at her. "No," he said. "We did." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lena reached into her jacket, pulled out the ring, and pressed it into his hand. "You earned it back. Daniel didn't take his eyes off her. What now, he asked. She exhaled. Now we see what truth sets free. They didn't speak for a while after leaving the conference hall. Outside the alley behind the venue was quiet, save for the soft patter of rain returning in faint drizzles. Lena leaned back against the brick wall, her breath fogging in the cool air. Daniel sat on an overturned crate across from her, the silver ring rolling between his fingers like a coin of fate. It was done. And yet, everything still trembled inside them. I thought it would feel louder, Daniel said softly. Lena looked at him. Louder revenge. Justice. Something cinematic. He gave a half-smile brittle at the edges. But it just feels like I pulled off a mask I didn't know I was still wearing. She stepped closer. Sometimes truth isn't an explosion. It's a release valve. He turned the ring in his palm again. I watched Serena lie with such grace. She stole the company, dismantled everything it stood for, and somehow, she made people applaud. You changed that, Lena said. You flipped the story back. A passing siren wailed faintly from a street over, and Daniel looked up at the gray sky rain dotting his lashes. I should feel something bigger. Anger. Triumph. I don't know, but all I feel is tired. Lena reached into her bag, pulled out a folded printout of the expose they'd scheduled. You'll feel something when this goes live tonight. Once it's read, shared, when it starts doing what stories are meant to do. He took it gently from her hands, read the byline by Lena Morales with recovered testimony from Daniel Archer. His eyes lingered on her name. You didn't have to put me there. You earned it, she said, and you told the truth. That matters. They stood in silence again side by side. The conference now swarmed with reporters and security. Behind them, Serena was likely already scrambling crafting denials, throwing assistants under the bus painting Daniel as a mentally unstable ex. But it wouldn't hold. Not this time. The files had too many timestamps, too many voices, too much truth. The story was out. By the time they got back to Lena's apartment, her inbox was flooded. 6 major outlets wanted exclusive interviews. A podcast network offered a 4-part investigative series. A national news anchor had emailed with the subject line, "We want to hear his side." Daniel stared at the screen, expression unreadable. Lena could feel his walls drawing up again, quiet, controlled. You don't have to speak, she said gently. The truth is out. Let it live on its own. He nodded, eyes still scanning the emails. I didn't come back for interviews. You came back for peace. He finally looked at her, and found you instead. The moment stretched. There was something there, an almost confession barely spoken, something neither of them could name yet. Lena gave a small, crooked smile. Let's make a deal. He raised an eyebrow. You don't vanish again, she said. Not until I finish the follow-up piece. He held her gaze. And after that, then you can disappear, she said. But maybe not so far. Daniel slipped the ring into his pocket. I think I'm tired of disappearing. She nodded. Good. And together they turned back to the quiet hum of her apartment papers, still scattered notes pinned to the wall, but now a story finally told, and a future somewhere just ahead, unwritten. The world didn't explode. It tilted. Slightly. Enough. Lena watched it all unfold from her window. The headlines, the editorials, the late-night panel debates. She didn't leave her apartment for 2 days except to buy coffee and scan the newsstands on the corner where her name now appeared in small print beneath words like expose, betrayal, and digital empire lies in ruins. Daniel didn't leave either. He paced. He read. He stared at the corkboard for long stretches like it might rearrange itself into a life he still recognized. On the 3rd morning, her old journalism professor called. You made a mess, he said. Good. By the 4th, Serena Vale's attorneys issued a formal statement of resignation from Curion Systems, citing a misalignment of values and recent personal challenges. The board, under pressure, announced a full audit and an external ethics review. The public tone shifted slowly, then suddenly. What had once been a tech success story became a cautionary tale. Documentaries were pitched, Podcasts were planned, and Daniel's name was whispered in tech circles like a phantom, the CEO who came back from the dead only to walk away again. Lena knew the story had already become something larger than either of them, which was why 1 week after the conference she woke to find Daniel packing, not like a runaway, not like a fugitive, but like someone untethering himself from a place he no longer needed. "You could stay," she said quietly from the doorway. He looked at her, and in that look was every word he hadn't said. Grief, gratitude, maybe even love. But he shook his head. This story was never supposed to be about coming back. It was about letting go. She crossed the room and placed a folded sheet of paper into his hands. It was the unpublished follow-up, the one she'd written just for him. He didn't vanish. He just chose silence until someone gave him the language to return. Daniel read it without speaking, then tucked it into his coat. "What will you do?" she asked. He smiled, soft and tired. Something small, something honest. He hesitated. Then, "There's a town I passed through years ago. Lakeside. They had a tiny bookstore, a half-abandoned cafe, and a community center that needed help. I might go there." Lena blinked. "That sounds like fiction. That's the point." He reached into his bag and pulled out a tiny velvet pouch, the ring. He placed it on the table beside her keyboard. "I won't need it where I'm going," he said. "But if you ever forget why truth matters, hold on to it." Lena didn't trust her voice, so she nodded instead. At the door he paused, looked back. "Thank you, Lena." "For what?" "For seeing me." Then he was gone. Later that night, as the apartment fell silent again, Lena turned on her recorder. Her voice was quiet, steady. The truth doesn't shout. It waits. And when it finally steps into the light, it doesn't demand justice. It offers peace, if we're brave enough to accept it. She closed her laptop, picked up the ring, and smiled. That night, the apartment felt too quiet. Not in a lonely way, just hollow, like something had been drawn out of it and left behind. Lena sat on the couch, legs pulled to her chest, Daniel's ring resting in her palm. It still held a bit of warmth, though she knew it was probably just her imagination. Or maybe not. Objects she'd always believed remembered things. This one had seen the inside of boardrooms, the underside of a gutter, the truth of a man who no longer wanted to be king. And now, it was hers. The next morning she found a single envelope tucked beneath her front door. Inside, no note, just a Polaroid photo. Daniel standing beneath a faded sign that read, "Start here." The rest of the photo showed a lakeside street, a whitewashed storefront, and a small chalkboard out front with the words, "Story nights, Saturdays, free coffee if you bring your truth." She stared at it for a long time, one hand pressed to her mouth. He hadn't said goodbye in the photo, hadn't written anything behind it, but he'd made his message clear. "You'll know where to find me." In the following days, Lena let the media storm crest and break without chasing its waves. She gave 2 interviews, declined 10, deleted 3 emails offering TV deals. The ones that promised money felt the emptiest. She wasn't looking for a spotlight anymore. She wanted what Daniel had found, or was trying to find. Something small, something honest. One afternoon, she took a long walk through Prospect Park, the ring tucked in her pocket like a compass. Her thoughts drifted, not just to him, but to herself, the version of her that used to believe in impact, in consequence, in choosing the story that scared you because it might be the one that saves you. She realized something watching a group of kids race past the benches. She wasn't afraid anymore. Back home, she reopened her manuscript, the one she'd started long before Echelon fell into her lap. A novel about a woman who vanishes after exposing corruption only to be rediscovered in the footnotes of history. It hadn't worked when she first wrote it. But now she had the ending. And maybe a new beginning. That night she poured herself tea, opened a fresh document, and titled it, "Start Here." Lena stepped off the bus onto cracked pavement, suitcase in hand, and the wind curling around her ankles like a greeting. The lakeside town looked exactly like the photo, quiet, timeless, stubbornly gentle, a row of shops with faded signs, children's chalk drawings on the sidewalk, a dog asleep beneath a bench. Somewhere in the distance, gulls cried over the water. She stood still for a moment, breathing it in. It was a place you didn't stumble into by accident. She pulled the photo from her coat pocket and turned toward the whitewashed storefront. "Start here." The wooden sign read, just as it had in the picture. Someone had drawn a heart in the corner with a bit of blue chalk. She crossed the street slowly. Each step felt like a sentence finally reaching its period. The bell above the cafe door gave a soft chime when she opened it. Inside, honeyed light-worn wooden floors, the scent of espresso, and something sweet baking. A corner shelf offered free books. A few tables were occupied by locals reading or sketching or simply sitting in silence. At the counter stood Daniel. He was wearing a black apron over a soft gray sweater. His hair was a little longer. There was flour on his forearm. But when he looked up and saw her, something unguarded passed across his face. Not surprise. Just warmth. Like he'd been expecting her, not hoping knowing. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said. Lena smiled. "I had to finish a few things. Save the world, rewrite the ending." He reached behind the counter, pulled out a mug, and began pouring her a coffee. No questions. No explanations. Just welcome. She leaned on the counter. "This place, is it yours? Mine, theirs, whoever needs it." He glanced at a kid reading in the corner, then back at her. "We host story nights, workshops, community meals. There's no board, no branding, just people trying not to feel invisible." Lena turned the mug in her hands. The inscription read, "Tell me something true." She looked up at him. "I missed you," she said. He exhaled quietly. "I missed being found." They stood there in the hush of the cafe, surrounded by the soft hum of conversation and the clink of ceramic cups. No flashbulbs, no headlines, just truth gently spoken. He gestured toward the back of the cafe. "There's a spare room upstairs. You don't have to decide now, but if you're still curious..." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the silver ring, set it on the counter between them. "I already decided." That evening they sat on the back porch as the lake shimmered under the setting sun. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't have to. They spoke of stories they hadn't written yet. Children who needed mentors, art supplies for the community center, a little garden out back. The future would come messy and unpredictable. But for now, Lena rested her head on his shoulder and Daniel held her hand. Not a proposal, just a beginning. Exactly what the sign had promised. Start here. Sometimes starting over doesn't mean chasing something bigger. It means choosing something quieter, truer, real. This was a story about a woman who never stopped believing in the truth, and a man who thought he'd lost everything until someone saw him for who he really was. No headlines, no spotlight, just two people who refused to disappear. If this story moved you, let us know where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you believe in second chances, quiet love, and the power of telling the truth, make sure to subscribe and click on the next story waiting for you on screen. Thanks for being here. See you in the next story.